Mortal Kombat is one of the most iconic fighting game franchises of all time, if not video games overall, and most MK fans have their own reasons for liking it and which aspect of it drew them in to play in the first place. For some it's the gameplay and characters, and others it's the shocking visual effects and over-the-top scenes that made the series what it is. Regardless of what got you into Mortal Kombat, however, one thing that cannot be denied is the existence and impact of the finishing moves. Present ever since the very first MK installment in the early 90s. Fatalities, animalities, friendships, and more. They're all a huge part of the franchise and are a constant reminder of the game's roots, and what helped it get its feet off the ground in the beginning. In the year of 2022, there have been countless finishing moves created across the many Mortal Kombat games, with some of them being genuinely creative, funny, kinda gross, and sometimes outright ridiculous. However, those aren't the ones we're focusing on today. Today's video highlights 5 times underwhelming finishing moves fell flat and didn't quite hit their mark. Before I start this video though, I must emphasize that this list is my opinion only. I have no doubt there'll be disagreements in the comments, but hey, that's the beauty of it. With hundreds of finishing moves to choose from, we're not all exactly gonna see eye to eye on all of them. We are Ketchup and Mustard, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more, hit the notification bell to stay updated, and we hope you enjoyed today's video. Number 5. Creator Fatality Armageddon. Already off the bat, I can tell this one's gonna be divisive, but I've gotta be honest, right? Don't get me wrong, I love MK Armageddon, but ever since I played it as a teenager, all the way until now, I've never liked the fatality system in this game. Creator Fatality is this game's version of the typical finishing move. Instead of each character having their own unique animations for a finisher, there existed a laundry list of individual inputs that the player can do one at a time in stages to create their own fatalities on the fly. The way it's done is actually very interesting, with all sorts of transitions to different positions, using weapons, but ultimately they ended up not really being anywhere near as impactful as the full-on fatalities from other 3D games. Now, I understand why these had to exist the way they did. As stated in a developer interview many years ago, due to the nature of Armageddon featuring every playable MK character up to that point, it simply wasn't feasible for every single character to have their own unique finishing move, and this system was in place to still allow fatalities to exist while still making them fit in the game. Unfortunately though, many players would end up simply just not doing them, keeping them intentionally short, or using them to just troll players by endlessly repeating the different positions, which is funny at first, but gets rather annoying after a while. A creative way of getting around hardware restrictions for sure, but compared to the usual, not really the most interesting. Number 4. Movado MK Deadly Alliance. Beforehand, I mentioned some interesting cool full-on fatalities in the 3D games, and believe me, the 3D games have some of the best finishers of the entire series, and I'll fight that point to the end. However, this one ain't one of them, and it belongs to one of the MK characters we saw debut in the 3D era, but not return as a playable or NPC appearance since. Movado was a newcomer to Deadly Alliance, and was most remembered from having hook swords instead of Cabal. But outside of that, Movado did have some interesting specials and attacks focused around mobility, using hooks from his wrists. These would be put front row and center in his debut finisher, where we'd see him get into position, wind up some more, and then crash into his opponent's spiked boots first to finish them off. Now, this sounds cool on paper, but due to the fact this was the MK team's first attempt at making an MK game on the PS2 era hardware, you can tell that they were still getting comfortable with it, as this has little to no impact at all and is barely any different to his actual special moves. There's just something about this one in particular that always really disappointed me. Movado had some cool ideas in this game, and this one just fell flat. I genuinely think if we see Movado return in future games, we could definitely see improvements from this. Fortunately for Movado though, this was far from the worst finisher in Deadly Alliance, and we'll come back to that later. Number 3. Ermac Ultimate MK3. Time to go back to the arcade era for this one, and we're talking about Ultimate MK3. Arguably the most iconic of the arcade era MKs for various reasons, but that's a discussion for another day. When it came to finishing moves, Ultimate MK3 had its fair share of memorable, flashy, funny, comedic, but unfortunately a few didn't quite hit the mark either. Now, I understand why things were a little more tame. MK2 was one of the games responsible for the creation of the ESRB rating system, largely due to its particularly graphic nature, which is typically said to have resulted in the violence in Ultimate MK3 being somewhat less over the top, if not still a bit intentionally ridiculous. The example I'm using for this video though is Ermac's generic uppercut. I don't know if it was a time thing or what, but especially in comparison to his other finisher in this game, which still gets referenced in his finishes today, it's just so It's not really the worst thing in the world, but it's just kind of boring. It might sound like a nitpick, but especially as Ultimate MK3 has some of the most creative in this series overall, this one always stood out to me as a bit of a flop. Number 2. Kano, MK vs DC. This one is a no-brainer. I could make a 5 underwhelming finishers list from MK vs DC by itself, but I just had to get this one in here. MK vs DC is a game that is rather divisive among MK fans. Personally, it's Ketchup and I's least favourite MK of the mainline series. It's not without its charm, but overall we just don't really enjoy it or care for it all that much. One reason the more casual core audience wasn't huge on it is the censored violence. As this was the first time MK was officially crossing over to another series, the powers that be weren't too hot on the idea of Sub-Zero ripping Batman's head off, so the violence had to be toned down significantly. Personally, I didn't mind this too much, as that aspect of the games hasn't really been an important part of why I play MK in a very long time, but it didn't stop the finishing moves that remained from being largely really bad. Kano in particular has one of the more memorable from the game, which is basically just a throw attack you'd see in literally any other MK as a basic move. I mained Kano in this game, so I saw this all the time. You can tell they really tried their best with the restrictions they had, and I do respect that. It's not like everyone is bad in this game. Sub-Zero and Scorpions are alright, as are the Jokers, etc. But the bad ones are real bad, and definitely stand out among the rest. Number 1. Quan Chi, Deadly Alliance. As I was foreshadowing earlier, we're picking on Deadly Alliance again. I'd wager most of you saw this coming, and congratulations, you'd be correct. Because in my opinion, the hands down worst MK fatality of all time goes to Quan Chi in MK Deadly Alliance. I really don't understand this one. I don't know how it happened, but it's rough. The neck stretch is infamous at this point, and the only redeeming thing about it is the comic relief, but I don't get the impression it was meant to have any. MK developers over the years have themselves stated that, yeah, this one definitely wasn't a high point in the series, but if you're a glass half full kind of person, you could argue that you take the bad with the good, and this one being so bad helps emphasize the ones that are better, but that could be being a little too optimistic. Overall, Quan Chi has done a lot better in other games, so we can forgive him for this particular slip-up, but good lord, I honestly don't think we'll ever see a fatality that I like less. I hate it, I hate it, I hate it. And that's 5 underwhelming finishing moves in Mortal Kombat. Like I said at the start, this is just my opinion, and I have no doubt some of you will disagree, so let me know what would make your personal list. But for now, thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.